It's not every day you wake up to find excavators carving roads into your mountainside and contractors hammering together luxury cabins on land you fought for in Afghanistan. But there I was, standing on my porch in a ratty bathrobe, steaming, coffee mug in one hand and my grandfather's brass telescope in the other, watching as 50 prefab vacation homes sprouted like invasive weeds across my untouched wilderness. The president of the Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association, Vivian Caldwell, stood by her pearl-white Range Rover at the newly bulldozed property line, designer hiking boots pristine against the disturbed earth, pointing at a surveying crew, with the authority of a 5-star general while completely ignoring the no trespassing signs I'd placed every 20 feet along my perimeter. I'd been back from my 3rd deployment for just 6 months. The transition to civilian life after 15 years in the military hadn't been smooth. Nightmares, hypervigilance, and the persistent ringing in my left ear from an IED that had caught our convoy outside Kandahar. But this land had been my salvation. 300 acres of pristine Montana wilderness, passed down through 3 generations of my family, with nothing but pine trees, wandering elk, and blessed silence. Or at least that had been the case until Vivian Caldwell and her development company decided my family's legacy looked like prime real estate for weekend warriors wanting authentic mountain experiences with heated floors and Wi-Fi. When I purchased the adjacent 50 acres from Old Man Hutchinson last spring, I'd triggered something I couldn't have anticipated. A legal battle that would reveal corruption reaching from our tiny mountain town all the way to the state capital. What Vivian and her cronies didn't realize was that before I'd been a combat engineer, I'd been a paralegal. And while they were building luxury cabins on my mountainside, I was quietly building a legal trap that would eventually collapse their entire operation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Jackson Reed, former Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, now just a guy trying to live peacefully in the same cabin my grandfather built with his bare hands in 1953. When I returned from Afghanistan, last year, this place was overgrown, the roof needed work, and wildlife had taken up residence in more than one room. But it was home, the only place that felt right after everything I'd seen overseas. The first 3 months were dedicated to repairs, which suited me fine. Physical labor kept the memories at bay, and I slept better after a day of roofing than I had in years. By spring, I'd restored most of the cabin, cleared the immediate grounds, and was starting to feel something close to peace for the first time since enlisting at 19. That's when Earl Hutchinson, my elderly neighbor to the east, mentioned he was looking to sell his land. Earl was 83, his children had long ago moved to California and had no interest in mountain living, and his arthritis made maintaining even his small cabin increasingly difficult. "Rather sell to you than those developer vultures," Earl told me one evening as we shared beers on his porch. "They've been circling for years, sending fancy letters and showing up with fruit baskets like I'm some senile old fool who doesn't know what his land is worth." The vultures he referred to were Pine Valley Estates, a luxury development that had started on the north side of the mountain about 5 years earlier. I'd seen their billboards on the highway. Mountain living, without the sacrifice, featuring images of log mansions with floor-to-ceiling windows and hot tubs overlooking the valley. The kind of places that started at 7 figures and required membership in their exclusive homeowners association. I didn't have that kind of money. Not by a long shot. My military pension and disability benefits kept me comfortable but far from wealthy. Still, I had savings, and more importantly, I had the deed to my family's land free and clear. After some discussion and a call to my bank, I made Earl an offer significantly above what he'd paid decades ago, but still within my means if I took out a modest loan. "Done," Earl said, not even bothering to negotiate. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers next week." The transaction was completed within a month. I didn't do anything with Earl's 50 acres immediately. The land was mostly untouched forest with a small cabin similar to mine, though in worse condition. I figured I'd eventually use the timber for projects, or maybe build a guest cabin for the occasional visits from army buddies. Mostly, I just wanted to ensure no one built some monstrosity that would destroy the silence I'd come to depend on. That silence was shattered at 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday in early June by the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery. At first, I thought, it might be road crews on the county highway that wound past the foot of the mountain, but the noise was too close, coming from Earl's, now my property. I threw on clothes, grabbed my grandfather's old field binoculars, and hiked through the woods toward the commotion. What I found stopped me cold. 3 bulldozers were clearing a path through the forest, toppling 100-year-old pines like matchsticks. Behind them, a crew in hard hats consulted blueprints spread across the hood of a truck with Pine Valley Estates emblazoned on the door. I approached the nearest worker, fury building with each step. "What the hell is going on here?" The man, barely out of his 20s and sporting a patchy beard, looked startled. "Clearing for the access road, sir." "Access to what? This is private property." He frowned, then waved over an older man in a button-down shirt and pristine hard hat who I assumed was the foreman. "There must be some confusion," the foreman said, extending his hand, which I pointedly didn't shake. "I'm Dan Mercer, project manager for the Pine Valley expansion. We have all the necessary permits." He pulled out a tablet and showed me a PDF of what appeared to be county building permits and a survey map. "This is my land," I said, my voice deadly calm despite the rage building inside me. "I purchased it from Earl Hutchinson last month." Dan's confident expression faltered slightly. "That's not possible. Pine Valley purchased development rights for this parcel last year." "Then you purchased them from someone who didn't own them." "I have the deed, recorded with the county. You need to stop work immediately." Dan's radio crackled, and a woman's voice came through. "Is there a problem, Dan?" He stepped away to respond, but not far enough that I couldn't hear him explain the situation. The voice on the other end paused, then, "I'll be right there. Don't stop work." 15 minutes later, a Range Rover pulled up alongside the construction vehicles. The woman who emerged looked like she'd stepped out of a luxury outdoor clothing catalog. Expertly highlighted blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, expensive-looking hiking clothes that had clearly never seen a trail, and an expression of practiced concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Reed, I presume?" "I'm Vivian Caldwell, president of the Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association and CEO of Caldwell Development Group." Her smile was as practiced as her concern. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. You're trespassing and destroying my property." Vivian maintained her smile, though it tightened at the edges. "Our company purchased development rights to this parcel last year, with all the proper paperwork filed with the county. If Earl Hutchinson sold you the land without disclosing that, I'm afraid that's a matter between you and him." "Show me the documentation," I demanded. She nodded to an assistant who produced a folder with surprising readiness. Inside was a contract signed by Earl, dated 14 months prior, granting Pine Valley Estates exclusive development rights to his property for a sum that made my eyes widen. "Earl never mentioned this," I said, studying the document. "Well, he is getting on in years," Vivian said with faux sympathy. "Perhaps he forgot, or perhaps he saw an opportunity to double dip by selling you land he'd already committed to us." Something felt wrong. I'd known Earl for years. He wasn't the type to pull a scam, and he certainly wasn't suffering from memory issues. More importantly, the signature on the document, while similar to Earl's, had subtle differences from the one I'd seen on our sale paperwork. "I need to make some calls," I said. "Your crew needs to stop work until this is sorted out." Vivian's smile disappeared entirely. "I'm afraid we can't do that. We have investors expecting Phase 3 to break ground this month, and our permits are time-sensitive. If there's an issue with your purchase, you'll need to take it up with Mr. Hutchinson and the county." She turned to leave, then paused. "We're not unreasonable, Mr. Reed. If it turns out there is some validity to your claim, I'm sure we can come to an arrangement. Pine Valley Estates is always looking to acquire more panoramic lots. Your family's property has one of the best views on the mountain. The threat was thinly veiled. This wasn't just about Earl's 50 acres. They wanted my family's land too. Get off my property, I said quietly. We have valid permits. Get off my property now, or I'm calling the sheriff. Something in my tone must have registered because Vivian's expression shifted subtly. She'd probably encountered angry landowners before, people who made threats but ultimately backed down when confronted with legal documents and corporate lawyers. But she hadn't dealt with someone who'd spent 15 years following orders in war zones, who'd learned that tone of voice that made even hardened sergeants straighten up. We'll pause work temporarily while you sort this out with the county, she conceded, though her expression suggested this was far from over. But our equipment stays where it is. As soon as she and the work crew departed, I hiked back to my cabin and called Earl. No answer. I tried his daughter in California, who informed me Earl was in the hospital for hip replacement surgery and wouldn't be available for at least a few days. Next, I called the county records office and asked about development permits issued for Earl's property. According to their system, permits had indeed been issued to Pine Valley Estates 3 months ago. When I explained I had purchased the property a month earlier and the deed was recorded in my name, the clerk sounded confused. "Let me pull up the property records," she said. After a long pause, "That's strange. According to our system, the property is owned by Pine Valley Holdings, LLC, with the transfer from Earl Hutchinson recorded 9 months ago." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I have the deed right here, signed by Earl and notarized. I don't know what to tell you. Sir, our records show the property belongs to Pine Valley. If you believe there's been a mistake, you'll need to file a dispute with the county assessor's office." I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. Something was very wrong. Either Earl had knowingly sold me property he no longer owned, which seemed completely out of character, or records had been falsified. Neither option made sense, but the bulldozers tearing up the forest were very real. I spent the rest of the day making calls. To the title company that had handled my purchase, to my bank, to a lawyer friend from my hometown. By evening, I had more questions than answers, but one thing was becoming clear. Someone at the county level had altered records after my purchase, changing the ownership from my name to Pine Valley Holdings. The next morning, I drove to the county seat, a small city about 40 miles from my mountain. The records office was in a dated government building with flickering fluorescent lights and the distinct smell of old paper and industrial cleaner. The clerk at the front desk, a woman in her 60s with cat-eye glasses, looked up as I approached. "Can I help you?" I explained my situation as concisely as possible, showing her my deed and the title insurance paperwork. "Oh my," she said, examining the documents. "This doesn't make sense. Let me check something." She disappeared into a back room and returned several minutes later with a folder. "According to our paper records, this property was indeed transferred to you on May 12th. But the computer system shows it belonging to Pine Valley Holdings as of last September." "How is that possible?" She lowered her voice. "Between you and me, there have been some irregularities since we switched to the new digital system last year. Commissioner Hargrove pushed it through despite concerns about security. Only certain people have access to make changes." Commissioner Hargrove. The name was vaguely familiar. I'd seen it on campaign signs when I first returned to Montana. Would one of those people happen to be connected to Pine Valley Estates? I asked. The clerk's expression told me everything I needed to know. "Commissioner Hargrove's daughter-in-law is on their board of directors," she whispered. "But you didn't hear that from me." I spent the next hour filling out forms to formally dispute the property records and request an investigation into the discrepancy. The clerk, whose name was Martha, promised to flag the issue personally and suggested I contact the state land office as well. As I was leaving, Martha called out to me, "You're not the first, you know." I paused. Not the first what? Not the first person to have problems with property records around Pine Valley. There were others. Small parcels, mostly elderly owners, always somehow ending up in Pine Valley's possession despite disputes. What happened to those cases? Martha looked around to ensure no one was listening. They disappeared. Complaints withdrawn. People took settlements. One family moved away entirely after their house mysteriously burned down during the dispute. A chill ran down my spine. "Thank you for telling me." "Be careful," she said. "And maybe make copies of that deed. Keep them somewhere safe." When I returned to my cabin that afternoon, the construction equipment was back in action, this time accompanied by a sheriff's department vehicle. Deputy Wallace, a man I recognized from town but didn't know well, intercepted me as I approached. "The work site, Mr. Reed," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I've been asked to inform you that you're trespassing on Pine Valley property." "This is my land, Deputy. I have the deed." "County records say otherwise," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "I'm just doing my job here." "Does your job include enforcing fraudulent property claims? Because that's what's happening. Someone altered the records after I purchased this land." The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I don't know anything about that. I got a call from the commissioner's office telling me to come out here and make sure the work crews weren't interfered with. If you have a dispute, you need to take it through proper channels." "I've already started that process," I said. "In the meantime, they have no right to be destroying this property. According to the paperwork I was given, they do." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Between us, something doesn't smell right about this, but my hands are tied." "Commissioner, Hargrove made the call himself." There it was again, Hargrove's name. The pieces were starting to come together, but I still didn't have the full picture. As the deputy walked back to his vehicle, Vivian Caldwell approached, looking far too pleased with herself. "As you can see, Mr. Reed, everything is in order," she said. "The county records clearly show Pine Valley has rightful ownership of this parcel. If you continue to interfere with our development, we'll be forced to seek an injunction against you." I stared at her, rage and determination crystallizing into something cold and focused. "This isn't over, Ms. Caldwell." "I think it is," she replied smoothly. "But as I mentioned yesterday, we're very interested in acquiring your family property as well. Given these complications, perhaps selling would be the simplest solution for everyone. We're prepared to offer a very generous price." In that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't just about Earl's 50 acres. This was about my family's 300 acres too. Prime real estate with the best views on the mountain. They'd used falsified documents and corrupted officials to steal Earl's land, and now they were using that as leverage to pressure me into selling my inheritance. They had picked the wrong person to bully. 15 years in the military had taught me many things, but perhaps the most important was this. When you're outgunned, you don't fight directly. You set traps, gather intelligence, and attack from angles your enemy doesn't expect. "I'll have my lawyer contact you," I said, turning to leave. Vivian's smile widened, sensing victory. "Wonderful. I'm sure we can work something out that benefits everyone." As I walked back to my cabin, plans were already forming in my mind. Vivian Caldwell and Commissioner Hargrove thought they had me cornered, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. They had resources and connections, but I had something more valuable. The truth, military training and gathering intelligence, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The legal trap was about to be set, and Pine Valley Estates was walking right into it. I'd learned in Afghanistan that direct confrontation against a superior force was suicide. When our convoy encountered insurgents with better positions and more firepower, we didn't charge headlong into their sights. We retreated, regrouped, and found their vulnerabilities. This situation required the same approach. Pine Valley had money, political connections, and apparently the ability to manipulate county records. I needed to understand exactly what I was up against before planning my counterattack. My first step was to document everything. I drove to Riverdale, the nearest town with a decent office supply store, and purchased a high-resolution camera, a portable scanner, and a waterproof safe. Then I spent the entire evening photographing every relevant document, my deed to both. Properties, Earl's original paperwork, the title insurance policy, tax records, even the property boundary markers. I scanned everything, creating digital copies that I stored on multiple flash drives, uploaded to a secure cloud account, and sent to my old Army buddy Marcus, who now practiced law in Seattle. "This is seriously messed up, Jack," Marcus said during our late-night call. "They're basically trying to steal your land through falsified records." "Can they get away with it?" I asked. "Not if we can prove the records were altered after your purchase. The paper trail and the digital changes should." "Create a timeline," he paused. "But you need to document the construction too. Date-stamped photos, videos of the equipment on your land, and start interviewing your neighbors. If Pine Valley has done this before, other people might have evidence or stories that establish a pattern." The next morning, I hiked through the woods surrounding my property, using game trails to move quietly between vantage points where I could photograph the construction without being noticed. I watched as more equipment arrived, an additional bulldozer, a massive excavator, and several trucks loaded with prefabricated cabin sections. They were moving fast, clearly hoping to establish facts on the ground before I could mount any effective legal challenge. By mid-afternoon, I'd compiled extensive documentation and was heading back to my cabin when I noticed smoke rising from Earl's small house on the disputed property. I quickened my pace, approaching cautiously through the trees until I had a clear view. Two men in Pine Valley work shirts were hauling furniture and boxes out of the cabin and tossing them into a burn pile. Cold fury washed over me as I realized what they were doing. Destroying evidence of Earl's occupancy, maybe even burning documents that could help prove my case. I raised my camera and started recording, zooming in on their faces and the Pine Valley logos on their clothing. One of them poured something from a red container onto the pile, gasoline most likely, while the other flicked a lighter. The flames shot up immediately, consuming what looked like photo albums, old furniture, and boxes of papers. I felt physically ill watching these strangers destroy Earl's possessions, the memories and items he'd left behind when he moved to the hospital for his surgery. But I forced myself to keep recording. Every second of footage was evidence. When the men finally departed, I waited until the fire had died down before approaching. Most items were completely destroyed, but at the edge of the pile, protected. By a fallen piece of metal shelving, I found a partially burnt shoebox. Inside were old photographs of Earl's family, some singed letters, and at the bottom, a leather-bound journal. I took it all back to my cabin, carefully separating the burnt pages of the journal. Many entries were illegible, but one from the previous year caught my attention. Caldwell woman came by again with another offer. Twice market value, she says. Don't care. Not selling to those vultures. Told her the land goes to Jackson when I'm gone. She didn't like that. Said something about commissioners making sure development happens one way or another. Sounded like a threat. My hands were shaking as I read those words. This wasn't just fraud. It was a systematic campaign to pressure Earl. And when that failed, they'd simply fabricated documents and manipulated county records. But why were they so fixated on this particular property? Earl's 50 acres were nice, but no different from dozens of other parcels around the mountain. I needed more information, and I needed allies. Pine Valley clearly had influence over the county commissioner, and apparently the sheriff's department too. I couldn't trust official channels, but Martha at the records office had mentioned other disputes. Those former landowners might be willing to talk. I spent the next day in the county library, searching through local news archives and property transaction records. Most of the stories followed the same pattern: elderly or vulnerable landowners pressured to sell, followed by disputes over documentation, and eventually Pine Valley taking possession while the former owners either settled for much less than the initial offer or simply disappeared from the narrative. One name kept appearing in these transactions: Samuel Hargrove, the county commissioner Martha had mentioned. Before his election 5 years ago, he'd been a real estate attorney specializing in property disputes. His campaign had been generously funded by several development companies, including one called Caldwell Investments, almost certainly connected to Vivian Caldwell of Pine Valley. This wasn't just about my land. This was a coordinated effort to acquire specific properties around the mountain, primarily those with water rights or strategic access points. Looking at a map, I could see that Earl's property, my property, contained a critical access route to the eastern slope, where the most valuable view parcels would be located. Without it, Pine Valley would have to build a much longer, more expensive road around protected wetlands. By evening, I had compiled a list of 6 former landowners who had publicly disputed Pine Valley's claims before eventually settling or disappearing from public records. 3 had moved away, 1 had died, but 2 still lived in the area. The closest was Eleanor Jenkins, a retired school teacher whose family had lost 20 acres to Pine Valley 2 years earlier after a similar dispute over allegedly falsified documents. I found her address and drove there the next morning, rehearsing my approach. Would she be willing to talk, or would she be too intimidated? Would she think I was working for Pine Valley, trying to check if she was still honoring whatever silence agreement they'd forced on her? Eleanor's house was a modest single story on the outskirts of town, with flowering planters hanging from the porch and a hand-painted mailbox. I knocked, hearing the faint sound of a television inside. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a slender woman in her 70s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp, assessing eyes. "Mrs. Jenkins? My name is Jackson Reed. I recently purchased some land on Elk Ridge Mountain, and I'm having some problems with Pine Valley Estates. I was hoping I might talk to you about your experience with them." Her expression hardened. At the mention of Pine Valley, for a moment, I thought she might close the door, but instead, she stepped aside. "You'd better come in," she said, her voice low. "But I should warn you, talking about this cost me more than just my family's land." Inside, Eleanor's living room walls were covered with photographs. Generations of her family, many posed on what I assumed was their former property on the mountain. She gestured for me to sit, then checked that her curtains were fully closed, before joining me. "They took everything," she began without preamble. "The land had been in my husband's family for 80 years. After Joe died, they started coming around, making offers. When I refused, strange things began happening. Survey stakes appeared on my property, then building materials. One day I came home to find bulldozers clearing trees. When I called the sheriff, they showed me papers saying Pine Valley owned development rights. The signature on the document wasn't Joe's. He'd been dead for 2 years by the supposed signing date." Her story was eerily similar to mine, down to the falsified signatures and sudden appearance of construction equipment. "What did you do?" I asked. "I fought it. Had a lawyer from Missoula who believed me. We were building a case about the forged documents when my grandson's college scholarship was suddenly revoked. The same week, my daughter was fired from her job at the county health department. Then someone broke in here and left my gas stove running while I was asleep." She looked at me steadily. The message was clear. I signed their settlement offer the next day, 10 cents on the dollar of what the land was worth. My blood ran cold. "You think they were behind all of that?" "I know they were. Commissioner Hargrove personally delivered the final settlement papers, said it was a courtesy, but we both knew it was to make sure I understood the consequences of continuing to fight." She leaned forward. "Are they after your land now?" I nodded. briefly explaining my situation with Earl's property and the altered records. "They won't stop at 50 acres, she warned. "They want it all. Every parcel with water rights or road access. The whole development hinges on controlling those strategic points." "Why hasn't anyone exposed this?" I asked. "Surely the state authorities? Hargrove's brother-in-law is on the state land board," she cut in. "His college roommate is a federal judge. This goes deeper than you think." I tried sending evidence to a reporter in Helena. 3 days later, he was reassigned to cover school board meetings in Wyoming. I was beginning to understand the scale of what I was up against. Not just a greedy HOA, but a sophisticated network of corrupt officials and business people working together to seize valuable mountain property through any means necessary. "I need to know everything you can tell me," I said. "Every detail of how they operated, who was involved, what methods they used." Eleanor studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You're military, aren't you? I can tell by how you carry yourself. My Joe was Marines, Korea. Army. 15 years. Then maybe you have a chance. You know how to fight differently than I did." She stood and went to a bookshelf, removing a false panel to reveal a hidden compartment. From it, she extracted a thick manila envelope. "This is everything I couldn't send to the reporter: copies of the forged documents, photographs of Hargrove with Caldwell Investments executives, records of payments from shell companies to county officials. I've been collecting it for years, hoping someday someone could use it." I accepted the envelope, understanding the risk she was taking. "Thank you. I'll be careful with this." "Don't be careful," she replied fiercely. "Be effective. These people have stolen land and livelihoods from dozens of families. Someone needs to stop them." As I drove back to my cabin, the envelope secure in my backpack, I felt the weight of responsibility Eleanor had placed on me. This wasn't just about my 50 acres anymore. It was about justice for everyone who had been bullied and defrauded by Pine Valley and their corrupt network. The construction on my land had progressed at an alarming rate. In just 3 days, they'd cleared several acres, laid foundations for multiple cabins, and were now framing structures. They were racing to create irrevocable changes to the property, knowing that courts were often reluctant to order the demolition of completed buildings even in cases of disputed ownership. I needed to act quickly, but also strategically. Confronting them directly had failed. Going through normal legal channels would be too slow given their political connections. I needed to build a case so airtight and so public that even their network of corrupt officials couldn't make it disappear. Back at my cabin, I carefully examined Eleanor's documents. They contained exactly what she had promised: evidence of a years-long conspiracy involving bribery, document fraud, and intimidation. Most damning was a series of emails from Vivian Caldwell to Commissioner Hargrove, explicitly discussing how to pressure certain landowners and which county employees could be trusted to adjust records when necessary. I now had the ammunition, but I also needed a delivery system that couldn't be silenced or buried. And I needed to protect myself from the same intimidation tactics they'd used on Eleanor and others. As dusk fell, I sat on my porch watching the lights of construction vehicles moving through the trees on my stolen property. Pine Valley thought they were building vacation homes. They didn't realize they were actually digging their own graves. The legal trap was about to be sprung, and I would need every bit of my military training to pull it off. Military strategy teaches you to attack where your enemy least expects it. Pine Valley expected me to file lawsuits, make noise at county meetings, or perhaps try to sabotage their construction, all approaches they had encountered before and knew how to counter. They weren't prepared for what I did instead. I started by contacting every former military buddy I could trust. Marcus handled the legal framework, but I also reached out to Diego, who now worked for a cybersecurity firm, Sarah, who had become an investigative journalist for a national newspaper, and Mike, who ran a successful YouTube channel about government corruption. Each had specialized skills, and more importantly, each operated well beyond the reach of Commissioner Hargrove and his local influence. My plan had 3 simultaneous phases: documentation, distribution, and deception. For documentation, Diego helped me set up a secure server and database to store all the evidence, my own records, Eleanor's documents, and the growing pile of material we were gathering. Sarah began quietly interviewing other victims of Pine Valley's schemes, collecting sworn affidavits from people who had moved away and were no longer afraid of local retaliation. For distribution, Mike created an encrypted website ready to publish everything at once while Sarah prepared a comprehensive story for her newspaper. We established deadlines and fail-safes. If anything happened to me, the entire archive would automatically release to dozens of news outlets, law enforcement agencies, and watchdog groups. But the deception phase was my personal contribution. Instead of fighting Pine Valley's construction, I appeared to give up. I visited Vivian's office and, with barely contained anger that she mistook for resignation, told her I was considering their offer to buy my family's 300 acres. "I'm glad you're being reasonable, Mr. Reed," she said, unable to hide her smug satisfaction. "I'll have our lawyers draw up an initial proposal." "I'd like to see what you're planning first," I replied. "For the whole mountain, if I'm going to sell my family's legacy, I want to know what it's becoming part of." She hesitated only briefly before pulling out a large rolled blueprint. "We've been developing this master plan for years. Pine Valley Estates will eventually cover the entire northern face of the mountain, exclusive homes, a private ski facility, a members-only lake club. Your property is critical for the final phase, which includes these 20 ultra-luxury chalets along the ridge." I studied the plans, noting how they depended on access roads through both Earl's 50 acres and my family land. More importantly, I noticed something Vivian hadn't mentioned: a massive water diversion system that would redirect the mountain's natural springs to supply their development, potentially leaving downstream properties dry. "This is impressive," I managed, swallowing my disgust. "I need to think about it." "Don't think too long," she warned, her smile thinning. "Our offer won't wait forever, and we already own the access rights to your property. Over the next 2 weeks, I played the part perfectly, having visible conversations with a realtor, bringing surveyors to my land, even packing boxes that I left visible through my windows. All the while, our team was executing the real plan. Diego discovered that the county's digital record system had indeed been modified exactly 3 days after my deed was filed. The electronic timestamp was still embedded in the system's audit logs, which Commissioner Hargrove's people had forgotten to delete. Sarah found 3 more cases of forged documents, including one where the supposed signatory had been in a coma on the date of signing. Most damning of all, Mike uncovered offshore accounts receiving regular payments from Caldwell Investments. One belonged to Commissioner Hargrove, another to the county's head of information technology, a third to Judge Walter Simmons, who had dismissed 2 previous lawsuits against Pine Valley on technical grounds. 28 days after bulldozers first appeared on my land, Pine Valley had completed the foundations for all 50 cabins and was framing the structures at remarkable speed. Vivian called me personally. "Mr. Reed, we need an answer on your property. Our investors are eager to move forward with the final phase. Actually, I was hoping to discuss the terms in person. Perhaps at your office tomorrow?" "Excellent," she said, unable to hide her triumph. "Shall we say 10 a.m.? "Perfect." That night, I barely slept, checking and rechecking every element of our plan. By dawn, I was ready. I drove to town early, stopping first at the sheriff's office where, to my surprise, Sheriff Daniels himself was waiting. The stern, white-haired man had been largely absent from my previous interactions, sending deputies instead. "Mr. Reed," he said, gesturing to a chair in his office, "I understand you have some concerning information to share." I placed a thumb drive on his desk. This contains evidence of criminal conspiracy, racketeering, fraud, document falsification, and bribery involving Pine Valley Estates, Commissioner Hargrove, and several county officials. Copies have been sent to the FBI, the State Attorney General, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. His eyebrows rose slightly. That's quite an accusation. It's all documented. Time-stamped audit logs showing when records were changed, forged signatures, verified by forensic handwriting experts, offshore accounts, witness statements. Sheriff, they've been stealing land from people across this county for years. He was silent for a long moment, then sighed heavily. I've had suspicions, but Hargrove has influence with my budget, with the county commissioners. Concrete evidence has been hard to come by. Well, now you have it, and in about, I checked my watch, 30 minutes, it goes public nationwide. Sarah Winters at the Chronicle is publishing her investigation, and several other outlets will follow. The sheriff studied me with new respect. You've been busy. I've been fighting a war, just not the kind they expected. At 9:55 a.m., I walked into Pine Valley's gleaming office building. Vivian was waiting in a conference room, flanked by her attorney and Commissioner Hargrove himself, a surprise addition that confirmed how important my land was to their plans. Mr. Reed, Hargrove said, extending his hand with practiced political charm. I'm glad we could all come together to resolve this situation. I ignored his hand. I'm not here to sell. Vivian's smile froze. I thought we were past this unfortunate misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. You stole my land through falsified records. You've been doing the same to people across this county for years, and now it stops. Hargrove's face darkened. That's a serious accusation. It's all true. The forged documents, the altered county records, the offshore accounts where Caldwell Investments deposits your bribes. I placed copies of key documents on the table. Right now, this evidence is being published by the Chronicle and broadcast on national news. The FBI has opened an investigation, and the State Attorney General is preparing charges. The blood drained from both their faces. Vivian's attorney quickly gathered the documents, scanning them with increasing alarm. These are fabricated, Vivian said, but her voice wavered. Like the documents you created to steal Earl Hutchinson's land? The difference is, mine are real. I stood up. Oh, and those 50 cabins you're building? Every nail you've driven, every foundation you've poured, every dollar you've spent has been on my property. According to state law, any improvements made to land by parties without legitimate ownership belong to the rightful owner once fraud is proven. Hargrove found his voice. You can't possibly think, I don't think. I know. You built 50 luxury cabins on my land, and now they belong to me. Every single one. The trap had sprung perfectly. They had been so focused on getting me to sell my family's 300 acres that they never questioned why I wasn't fighting harder over Earl's 50 acres. They had poured millions into developing property that would soon legally revert to me. By evening, it was the lead story across the state. Mountain community corruption exposed. Developers' scheme backfires. Sheriff Daniels, with state police backup, was executing search warrants at the county offices, Pine Valley headquarters, and Hargrove's home. The FBI had frozen accounts connected to Caldwell Investments, and construction on my property had come to an abrupt halt, leaving 50 partially built luxury cabins sitting on land that was, once again, officially recognized as mine. 3 months later, Earl returned from his rehabilitation, astonished by what had transpired in his absence. His 50 acres were still his on paper. I had simply been his authorized agent while he recovered. We sat on his porch, looking at the silent, abandoned construction equipment and the half-finished cabins scattered through the trees. What are you going to do with them? He asked, gesturing at the structures. I smiled. I've been talking with some veterans groups. These cabins would make excellent transition housing for military families trying to reintegrate into civilian life. A peaceful place to heal. Earl nodded approvingly. Better neighbors than those Pine Valley folks would have been. The legal aftermath continued for more than a year. Vivian Caldwell pled guilty to multiple fraud charges in exchange for testimony against Hargrove and others. The commissioner was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Several county employees lost their jobs and faced their own legal consequences. Pine Valley Estates collapsed entirely, its assets seized and its investors suing what remained of the company. The half-built luxury development on the northern face of the mountain was eventually purchased by a conservation trust, ensuring it would remain wild. Eleanor Jenkins and the other victims formed a class action lawsuit that ultimately recovered much of what they had lost. Many chose to donate portions of their settlements to the veterans' retreat I was establishing on the 50 acres. As for my family's 300 acres, they remain untouched, a pristine wilderness where the only sounds are wind through pine, trees, birdsong, and occasionally the laughter of veterans and their families finding peace after their own battles. Sometimes I sit on my grandfather's porch at sunset, watching the fading light paint the mountain in gold and purple, and I think about how differently things might have turned out if Pine Valley had chosen another target. Someone without military training, without good friends, without the stubborn determination that comes from fighting in actual war zones. They thought I was just another landowner they could intimidate and outmaneuver. They never realized they were declaring war on someone who knew how to fight back. And in the end, the 50 cabins they built as monuments to their greed became symbols of their downfall, and the foundation of something far more meaningful. If you've enjoyed this true story of corruption exposed and justice served, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Every week I share real stories of ordinary people standing up against seemingly impossible odds and winning. From corporate whistleblowers to community activists, these are the untold battles happening all around us. Subscribe now so don't miss next week's incredible story about a small-town librarian who uncovered a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme that reached all the way to the governor's office. Remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption isn't a gun or a badge. It's the truth, strategically deployed.